All right, as you know, what we're doing here is we are going through the book of Daniel, and this book right here by John Lennox is probably the best current book on the topic. If you want to go deeper than what we can do here in this session, I highly recommend you get this book. It's called Against the Flow, The Inspiration of Daniel in an Age of Relativism, and it's something that I think Lennox has some great insights on. And as I say, he can go into a lot more detail than we can go through here. So again, if you want to go further, get this book by John Lennox. Let's review what we did last time. The overview of the book of Daniel, you could basically divide the book into two parts. The first part, chapters 1 to 6, Daniel's ministry in Babylon. Babylon, as you know, about 50 to 60 miles south of current-day Baghdad. We'll look at a map here in a minute. The second section of the book, 7 to 12, comprises Daniel's vision of the future. Future for him, some of the events have already come to pass, and then some of the events have not yet come to pass, long-term future. So that's in chapters 7 to 12. Last time we covered chapter 1. Today we're going to get into chapter 2. And in fact, this is the overall view of the first 6 chapters. Last time we pointed out that in chapter 1, Daniel, an exile in Babylon, decides he's not going to defile himself. He doesn't care what the king is going to tell him to eat. He's going to ask for a way to eat what he wants to eat, and he does so, and it actually works out for him. That's sometimes called the Daniel diet in modern times. We call that the Daniel diet. Interpreting the king's dream, that's what we're going to do here today. That's what Daniel did in chapter 2. Chapter 3 deals with idolatry and the fiery furnace. We'll get to that next time. Chapter 4 deals with the king's second dream, Nebuchadnezzar's second dream, and he actually converts at least to some form of theism, maybe Judaism at the time. And then the handwriting on the wall is in chapter 5, and then in chapter 6 is Daniel in the lion's den. And as we mentioned last time, there are so many sayings that we have in English today that actually come from this book. Here are some of them. The Daniel diet we just mentioned. Feet of clay. You ever hear somebody has feet of clay? That comes from Daniel chapter 2. We're going to see that here in just a few minutes. The fiery furnace, Daniel chapter 3. The handwriting on the wall is chapter 5. And in the lion's den is chapter 6. So this is a book that has gotten into the culture, at least its sayings have. And as you know, there are many sayings that we have, that we use, that are biblical sayings. We don't even know they're from the Bible. These are some of them right here. Now, the theme of Daniel. What is the theme of Daniel? We talked about it last time. The overall theme. What is it?
Daniel's reverence to God is...
Daniel is reverent toward God, but what's the overall theme of the whole book? What would you say? Yes, God is sovereign. God is sovereign, that God is in control even when things look really, really bleak. So the moral of the story is then you ought to stand because God is sovereign. Even if things may not work out in the short term, they're going to work out in the long term. If not on this planet, in heaven, they're going to work out. So you might as well stand. Now, where are we in Babylon? Over here is where Babylon is. You can see present-day Baghdad is right here between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Babylon was actually on the Euphrates right here. And this actually is almost due east, slightly northeast of where Jerusalem was. So when they exiled, which occurred in about 586 BC, most of them were exiled in 586 BC. Daniel was exiled in about 605 BC, about 20 years prior to that. They exiled going this way, okay? Because you don't do this, why don't you do that? Because that's nothing but desert, right? That's why, as we mentioned last time, when we're talking about, well, the armies are going to come out of the north on Israel. Oh, that's got to be Russia, right? Well, not necessarily. Why? Because you're not going to come out of the east, because you're not going to cross the desert. You're going to go like this to come down into the Holy Land. Now, there's a lot of history that goes into understanding what's going on in the book of Daniel. Nebuchadnezzar is probably the name or the leader spoken more of in the Bible, foreign leader spoken more of in the Bible than anybody else, perhaps with the exception of Pharaoh. If you do a search for Nebuchadnezzar, the name Nebuchadnezzar in the Bible, you're going to see him come up all over the place. Nebuchadnezzar took power in about 605 BC, from his father who died in Babylon. And Nebuchadnezzar, prior to taking over for his father, was his main military guy. And right up here in Carchemish was a famous battle. Not sure if that's the way you pronounce it, but that's a famous battle right there, way up on the Euphrates River. He had, Nebuchadnezzar had both the Assyrians, which were out of Nineveh, and the Egyptians converge on him there, and he destroyed them. He destroyed both the empire of Assyria, which was in decline at the time, and he also destroyed basically the Egyptians. And then he came down. He was on his way to take out, basically to take Egypt for himself when he got word that his father had died. So he reversed course and he went back to Babylon. In about, I think it was August of 605 BC, he got word that his father had died. He needed to come back to Babylon to take over. By September, about 3 or 4 weeks later, he was back in Babylon. Now, while he was down in this area, he took care of Judah, too, because Judah, the Jews, had aligned themselves with Egypt because they were under pressure from Babylon to pay tribute to Babylon. They would pay tribute, and as soon as they left, as soon as Babylon left, Nebuchadnezzar and the armies left, they would go back and say, hey, Egypt, help us out. Well, that was the wrong move. In fact, Jeremiah said, don't do that. And that's why Nebuchadnezzar had to keep coming back to Jerusalem, and we'll see later what he did to the kings of Jerusalem for failing to obey what he wanted them to do. And Jeremiah talks about all this. As you read through the book, you'll see Jeremiah talking about why Babylon came and took Jerusalem out. All right. Now, Babylon was an amazing place. This is an artist's rendering of it, obviously. It had probably over 500,000 people living there. It had 2 walls. One wall was 25 feet thick, and then another wall that surrounded that was about 23 feet thick, and there was debris in between the walls. So if you got over the first wall, you're going to have a rough time trying to get over to the second wall to get over it. There was a moat, essentially. The walls, Herodotus, a Greek, said the walls were a lot longer than they really were. Archaeology says the walls were maybe 11 miles long. But that's a long, long way to build a wall, right? 11 miles, 2 walls that you could race chariots on, basically. And they had towers, watchtowers every 65 feet. So, you know, they got a tower, and then 65 feet later another tower, 65 feet later another tower. This was supposed to be basically a city that you could not take. And this character, Nebuchadnezzar, who takes over in 605 BC, we know essentially, if this is an accurate drawing of what he looked like, because this is an engraving inside an onyx stone eye and a Marduk statue. Marduk was their main god, and Nebuchadnezzar was very devoted to Marduk. Also, he built the Ishtar Gate. This is a replica of it built in a museum in Berlin, but this was a beautiful gate devoted to the goddess Ishtar. And as we pointed out last time, the actual dedication of this gate was found archaeologically. They reconstructed the bricks, and the beginning of it says, I, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, the faithful prince, appointed by the will of Marduk. He goes on to say he built this great gate. So this is a real guy, Nebuchadnezzar. Archaeologically, and of course in the Bible. In fact, as I mentioned last time, they found bricks, a lot of them. In fact, one estimate says there were 14 million baked bricks to build Babylon. 14 million, 90% of them had Nebuchadnezzar's name on them. Okay? So this guy thinks quite highly of himself, right? He's putting his name everywhere. And he began rebuilding Babylon, or sprucing up Babylon, in 612 BC. He took over as king in 605 BC. And then there's also cylinders. What's a cylinder? This is a cylinder that tells us what Nebuchadnezzar had done. This particular cylinder was found in the ruins of the city of Babylon. The text here describes 3 palaces which Nebuchadnezzar built for himself in Babylon. And Daniel even says this. In Daniel 4, verse 30, it says, he's quoting what Nebuchadnezzar is saying, Is not this great Babylon that I have built for a royal dwelling by my mighty power and for the honor of my majesty? Wow, this guy's big, right? He's a pretty big deal. You can see why the Bible, when the Bible talks about him in Isaiah, the king of Babylon, that he's got a lot of hubris. A lot of commentators think that that is a parallel writing about Satan. They look at that text and go, well, he's talking about the king of Babylon, but it really seems like he's talking about Satan, that Satan had such pride that he fell away from the Lord and decided to go his own way. And this was a very beautiful place, the hanging gardens, the blue tile gates, the tiered structure, the ziggurats, just an absolutely beautiful city. And the Greeks said this, the Hebrews said this, everybody said that this place was just amazing. In fact, the gardens, the hanging gardens, were considered one of the 7 wonders of the world. And we even have some texts that actually tell us the military exploits of Nebuchadnezzar. For example, the Babylonian Chronicles, there are several of these texts that have been found, written in stone, and this one describes Nebuchadnezzar's first decade as king, along with his political and military exploits, including his first invasion of Jerusalem, or probably his second invasion, actually, not the final one. The final one was 10 years later in 587 BC. But Isaiah talks about this in Isaiah 39, that Nebuchadnezzar comes down to Jerusalem and he puts his own king in there. He gets rid of Jehoiakim, who's only 18 years old anyway, doesn't know what's going on. He puts his uncle in there and calls him Zedekiah. So Zedekiah is in charge now. Yet, as soon as Nebuchadnezzar leaves, Zedekiah tries to hitch his wagon to Egypt, and that's going to create a problem, as you'll see here a little bit later, because when Nebuchadnezzar comes back 10 years later, there's going to be literal hell to pay. All right? So these activities correspond to prophecies and histories recorded in Jeremiah, 2 Chronicles, 2 Kings, and of course they confirm the historicity of Nebuchadnezzar. Now this recent discovery is one of the most fantastic archaeological discoveries, I think, in biblical history. It may seem kind of mundane, but you'll see why this is a great discovery that really affirms the historical text of the Bible. This little thing, which is only 2.13 inches long, talks about some Babylonian official named Nebo Sarsiskim. Sarsiskim, I guess that's how you pronounce it. It's from 595 BC. So this is 10 years after Nebuchadnezzar takes over. And what does this little stone thing say? What it says is, first of all, it was discovered near Baghdad in the late 1800s. And this tablet was deciphered. It wasn't deciphered until 2007. Okay, so it's been in the basement of the British Museum for over 100 years. And it tells of this guy, Nebo, giving almost 2 pounds of gold at a temple in Babylon during the 10th year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign. You say, okay, big deal. So what? Why is this such a big deal? Because this guy right here, Nebo Sarsiskim, is one of Nebuchadnezzar's chief officers who would later assist Nebuchadnezzar at the invasion of Jerusalem 10 years later in 587 BC. How do we know? Because he's actually in the biblical text. This is Jeremiah, the invasion of Jerusalem in 587 BC. This is from Jeremiah 39. And Jeremiah tells us how all this went down. It says, this is how Jerusalem was taken. First of all, let me go back for a second. Nebuchadnezzar installs Zedekiah in about 597 BC. He says, you're in charge now. Your nephew's out. You're in. You pay attention to what I tell you to do. He doesn't as soon as Nebuchadnezzar leaves. And so Nebuchadnezzar's going to come back 10 years later and set the record straight. And Jeremiah tells us what happened. He says, this is how Jerusalem was taken. In the 9th year of Zedekiah, king of Judah, in the 10th month, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, marched against Jerusalem with his whole army and laid siege to it. And on the 9th day of the 4th month of Zedekiah's 11th year, okay, stop right there. How long has he surrounded the city and put it under siege? 2 years. Almost 2 years, about a year and a half, right? They didn't call them the months at that point like we call them, but the 10th month would be, let's just say it's October, and that's in the 9th year. By the 4th month of Zedekiah's 11th year, so that's like April, a year and a half later, is when they break through the walls. It takes them a year and a half to get over the Jerusalem walls. Well, what do you think's going on inside Jerusalem for that year and a half? Can they get supplies from outside? No. They may get water because Hezekiah has built a tunnel already. And when you go to Jerusalem today, you can walk through Hezekiah's tunnel. It takes water from the Gihon Springs into the city. But they didn't have a lot of food. In fact, Lamentations, probably written by Jeremiah, speaks of mothers actually eating their children. Cannibalism. They've got disease, no food, they're starving because Nebuchadnezzar surrounded the city, put it under siege, and a year and a half after that, he finally gets through the walls. And it says on the 9th day of the 4th month of Zedekiah's 11th year, the city wall was broken through. Check this out. Then all the officials of the king of Babylon came and took seats in the middle gate. Nergal-Sharezer of Samgar, Nebo-Sarsechim. That's the guy discovered in that little cuneiform tablet. A chief officer of Babylon, and Nergal-Sharezer, a high official, and all the other officials of the king of Babylon. Right after, this is Jeremiah 39, 1-3. Right after that, the next couple of verses says, Zedekiah saw this and fled the town, but Nebuchadnezzar caught up to him. And what happened when Nebuchadnezzar caught up to him? We'll get to it in a minute. It was not pretty. But let's go back to this find here. This guy, Irving Finkel, is one of the British Museum scholars there, and he says, this is a fantastic discovery, a world-class find. If Nebo-Sarsechim existed, which other figures in the Old Testament existed? A throwaway detail in the Old Testament turns out to be accurate and true. I think that it means the whole of the narrative of Jeremiah takes on a new kind of power. In other words, he's saying, look, this is historical. This is not hysterical. They're not making this stuff up. We're finding these names in the ground here. These are real people. These were real events. So you find this little 2-inch piece of rock with a name on it that Jeremiah just mentions in an offhanded way. Oh yeah, this guy was here too. That's all he says. Now, let's go back to Daniel chapter 1 for a second, and then we're going to transition into Daniel chapter 2. I just want to talk a little bit about the archaeology because it's so interesting, and you could spend hours and hours looking at this stuff. In fact, one of the cylinders, they found more than one cylinder. In fact, we'll look at some other cylinders in later chapters. One of the cylinders, and I don't know who owns this or how this works, but one of the cylinders was just sold at an auction somewhere for $605,000. One of the cylinders of Babylon. I don't know how this works. I don't know who owns it, but somehow somebody had it, and it was sold at auction. Let's go now to chapter 2. That's what we did in chapter 1. We just saw that Daniel didn't want to defile himself. Let's talk about Daniel chapter 2. If you have a Bible, you might want to go to Daniel chapter 2 because we're going to spend the rest of our time in it. Daniel chapter 2, and this is how it begins. In the 2nd year of his reign. So depending upon how you mark the years, because there's different ways to mark years. There's a Jewish way and a Babylonian way. We're not going to get into the differences here. But that was either 603 or 602 BC. So we're in the 2nd year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign. Nebuchadnezzar had dreams. His mind was troubled and he could not sleep. So the king summoned the magicians, enchanters, sorcerers, and astrologers to tell him what he had dreamed. When they came in and stood before the king, he said to them, I have had a dream that troubles me, and I want to know what it means. So what do you think the astrologers said at that point? Yeah, what was the dream, oh great king? You just tell us the dream and we're just going to cook up a nice interpretation for you. Don't worry about it. Right? Well, Nebuchadnezzar wasn't having any of that, right? He knew their game. So, a couple verses later, what does he say? He says, this is what I have firmly decided. If you do not tell me what my dream was and interpret it, I will have you cut into pieces and your houses turned into piles of rubble. But if you tell me the dream and explain it, you will receive from me gifts and rewards and great honor. So tell me the dream and interpret it for me. Uh-oh. Uh-oh, the gig's up now. So far, Nebuchadnezzar's thought that we had some kind of access to the spiritual world. So what do they say again? Hey, come on, man, just tell us the dream. Trust us. We'll give you a good interpretation. Don't worry about it. Nebuchadnezzar was not having any of that. Now, this guy, Nebuchadnezzar, as I mentioned, was tough. Let's go back to when they broke through the walls in 586 BC. Nebuchadnezzar tracks down Zedekiah. And I think Jeremiah tells us about this. He does in Jeremiah 39. And what he does to Zedekiah is he brings Zedekiah's two sons before Zedekiah, and then he murders the two sons in front of him. Then he pokes his eyes out, takes him to Babylon where he dies in prison. This guy didn't play around, did he? Nebuchadnezzar was brutal. Now, this kind of reminds you of another dictator from the area. Right? Same kind of thing. Just 2,600 years later. You got a guy who just is going to do things his own way, and he's going to rule by brute force. And some of you may know, I know Chuck does because he's been there, he led the 82nd Airborne into Iraq, that Saddam tried to rebuild Iraq, or tried to rebuild Babylon, I should say, right over the remains of ancient Babylon. And Nebuchadnezzar has bricks, so does Saddam. Saddam has bricks. In fact, this particular brick, let me get the exact, what it actually says on it. This particular brick says, this was built by Saddam Hussein, son of Nebuchadnezzar, to glorify Iraq. That's what it says. Son of Nebuchadnezzar. And Saddam was repeatedly trying to align himself with Nebuchadnezzar. Check this out. That's kind of cheesy, isn't it? He wants to be seen with Nebuchadnezzar. Check this out. He had coins done. There's Nebuchadnezzar. There's Saddam. He even had murals drawn. I couldn't get a real good shot of this one, but you could see there's Saddam. There's Nebuchadnezzar. There's another one I found online, but I couldn't use. I couldn't find the copyright for it. But Saddam is on one side of Babylon, the remains of Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar's on the other, and they both have their hands under a tree that's growing out of their hands, and it says something like, rebuilding Babylon together or something. As if he's Nebuchadnezzar. So what did you see when you were down there? What were the remains like when you were down there, Chuck?
The catacombs are down in the kind of like the flatlands where they were. Saddam built 4 big old mounds surrounding it, and on each one of those 4 mounds he was constructing a new palace. And one of the palaces was completed. The rest of them were just like mortar and concrete outcroppings, but that was his plan, to have the old catacombs in the middle and this new Babylon all around the old. I've got pictures of it I'll bring, if I can remember to bring a thumb drive next time.
Was this the palace right here? Hang on a second. Let me see if I can find it.
That's it, right there.
That's it? Okay. This one right here? That's where you were. Okay, you. This was looted?
Because they came in there and stole all the pipes out of it and all the doors and all that stuff.
All right.
During the before actually we got there.
Okay, so that it had already been looted before you got there. All right, so this is one of the four. There were three other ones?
3 other hills just like that. Right over the back of that, down in the lowlands behind that, was where the old catacombs of historic Babylon was.
All right. Well, he tried to bring it back, but you know the Bible says it'll never be brought back, and it hasn't been brought back even by Saddam. But Saddam was doing all this kind of stuff, and now all that's gone. Now if you Google Saddam murals or murals of Saddam in Iraq, you'll see many of them have been defaced. You'll see that many of the Iraqis have like knocked them over or drawn mustaches on him. You know, he already had a mustache, but goofy stuff on him, or totally chiseled his face out. You know, they did all sorts of he had murals of himself everywhere. It kind of reminds me when we went into Iran on the Noah's Ark expedition a number of years ago. Oh, there's Saddam on the money right there.
50 dinars of Saddam money. I use it as a bookmark.
Show that to the camera right
I
there.
use it as a bookmark right now.
There's Saddam money right there, okay?
I gave one of these to every senior leader who was in my command as a memento.
So yeah, he was, and when we were in Iran, we were there at the 17th anniversary of Ayatollah Khomeini's death, so there were pictures of Ayatollah Khomeini everywhere, all over the place. Banners in the streets, sides of buildings, sides of cars, buses, you know, just everywhere. It's just basically totalitarian propaganda is what it is. And so they're great at imagery. All right, this is the so-called new Nebuchadnezzar. Let's go back to the real Nebuchadnezzar. After they say to him, no, just tell us the dream again, he goes, you're stalling. I know what you're doing here. You're stalling. So tell me what the dream was. And here's what the astrologers say. The astrologers answered the king, there's not a man on earth who can do what the king asks. No king, however great and mighty, has ever asked such a thing of any magician, enchanter, or astrologer. Now, if you're Nebuchadnezzar, what are you thinking at this point? What do you guys do then? Right? If you don't have access to the spiritual realm, what am I paying you for? What's the point of this? This is a big scam, isn't it? So, by the way, astrologer, I remember Christopher Hitchens, who I had a couple of debates with. A lot of what he wrote in his book, God is Not Dead, How Religion Poisons Everything, or it's not God is Not Dead, it's because God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything. A lot of what he wrote in there is true, and he had this line in there, and he goes, astrology can be shown to be false by the simple observation that two people who have the same birthday don't have the same future, right? If you're identical twins, you don't have the same future. So how are the stars going to tell you what your future is? That makes no sense at all. In any event, they say, what the king asks is too difficult. No one can reveal it to the king except the gods, and they do not live among men. What is this worldview? What worldview is this? The gods don't live among men. Well, if gods exist, but they don't live among men, that might be something like deism, right? That there's a God out there, but he doesn't get involved. In their case, they may say gods. They don't get involved in human affairs. Or this could be just naturalism, that we create these gods in our minds, but they're not really there. Everything's just nature, materials. There is no spiritual realm. There is no supernatural reality. Everything's just made of molecules. So, this made the king so angry and furious that he ordered the execution of all the wise men of Babylon. Now, who did this include? Yeah, it included Daniel and his friends. Included everyone. So this is a pretty big order here. Now, let's go back to this point here about the gods do not live among men. The implication here is that the gods, if they exist, don't have anything to do with humankind. There's no access to it at all. This could be, as I say, considered materialism, which we've talked about in this class before. The question is there really a spiritual reality, or are we mere molecular machines? Is there a supernatural out there? Or is everything just a matter of molecules bumping into one another? As we've mentioned in here before, if that's the case, we shouldn't believe anything we think. Why? Because we're not really thinking anyway, we're just reacting. We're not making reasoned judgments. Every thought we have is the result of the laws of physics, so how could we even trust what we think? Of course there's a spiritual reality out there. We're using it right now to communicate with one another, certainly the laws of logic. But let's just take it from a God perspective. Is there any evidence that God intervenes in the world? Of course, we've been through that quite a bit in this session, but let me just look at it from the opposite perspective. This way. For the atheistic materialism worldview to be true, what we would call naturalism, for that to be true, every single miracle claim or spiritual experience in the history of the world, whether good or bad, has to be false. Think about that. Every spiritual experience anyone in history has ever had, whether from the good side or the bad side, whether from God or from demons, has to be mistaken. Now, I don't have enough faith to believe that, right? I mean, that's a pretty bold claim to say there has never been any spiritual experience that was really true. I can't see how that could be true. I mean, could it be true? Possible. I just don't think it's likely. You'd have to say every spiritual experience in history has been mistaken to say that naturalism is true. All right, let's go back and see what happens now. When Arioch, the commander of the king's guard, had gone out to put to death the wise men of Babylon, Daniel spoke to him with wisdom and tact. Wisdom and tact. Now, unfortunately, most of us in the public square fail to speak with wisdom and tact. Tim Keller, the pastor of Redeemer Church in New York, says most of what we say in public as evangelical Christians is either cowardly or obnoxious. And he's right. Right? We don't say anything, or we acquiesce, or what we say is just not worded right, or it's just obnoxious in such a way that it just turns people off. But Daniel had wisdom and tact. Remember, he's a young man at this point. He's what? 603 BC, he's maybe 20, between 20 and 25 maybe. That's how old he is. He speaks to this guy with wisdom and tact. He asked the king's officer, why did the king issue such a harsh decree? I mean, this is pretty rough, right? Kill everybody because these guys can't tell me what I dreamt? Arioch then explained the matter to Daniel. At this, Daniel went into the king. Wait. He goes into the king? Daniel has an audience with the king. Why?
Because he knew the dream.
Well, no. Why is the king going to see Daniel? How does he know Daniel? Go back to chapter 1, okay? Remember in chapter 1? He was selected by the king to go through their little Babylonian propaganda school. And that's when he got to know Daniel, and then it turned out that Daniel turned out to be wiser than just about everybody else. So he already knows Daniel. And here's what it says. He goes into the king, and he asked for time. Now, what did Nebuchadnezzar just say to the astrologers? You're stalling? What guts does it take to go into a guy who just said you're stalling and say, look, king, I need time? That's pretty bold, isn't it? Give me some time here. And apparently, the king says, okay, I'll give you time. So what does Daniel wind up doing? What does the text say?
Goes back to his partners and tells them all to pray.
Tells them all to do what? Hang on, I'm missing my...
In the meantime, did the king actually kill all those smart guys, or did Daniel stall?
No, hey, we're getting there, man.
Okay.
Spoiler alert!
Okay.
Come on! We're getting there. Daniel goes and he prays, and he goes to his buddies and say, oh, dudes, we need to pray, man. I just said I'm going to be able to tell him what the dream is. He didn't know the dream at that point. He just said, I trust God that God's going to tell me what the dream is. So they get together and have a little prayer meeting in Babylon there. And the dream is revealed. And here is Daniel's prayer back to God for revealing the dream. Praise be to the name of God forever and ever. Wisdom and power are his. Wisdom and power are his. That's a magnificent statement, isn't it? Wisdom and power are his. He changes times and seasons. In other words, he sets up kings and deposes them. What's this theme here? God is sovereign. God, oh, look, man, I'm 20 years old. I'm in Babylon. I don't have my family with me. Things are about to go really bad. The king wants to kill me and all of us. Don't worry. Everything's going to be all right. God is sovereign. This guy will be out of the way at one point too. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the discerning. By the way, what's a New Testament verse on this? If you want wisdom, what does James say? Pray, ask for it. And then study. Study the Proverbs. Study the Word. Get counsel. He reveals deep and hidden things, things that you can't get by just your own reason. These are coming from outside the realm, not inside. He knows what lies in darkness, and light dwells with him. I thank and praise you, O God of my fathers. How often do we thank God when he does do something we've asked for? You have given me wisdom and power. You have made known to me what we asked of you. You have made known to us the dream of the king. So now he knows the dream of the king. Now go back to this point here where he says wisdom and power and the deep and hidden things. Remember last time we talked about the 5 greatest questions in life. What are the 5 greatest questions in life? Do you remember them?
Why are we here?
Why are we here is one of them, yeah.
Where did we come from?
Where did we come from?
Where are we going?
Where are we going?
What's our purpose?
What's our purpose? How should we live as we're on our way there? These are the 5. Where did we come from? What's our identity? Who are we? What's the meaning of life? How should we live life then? That's morality. And what's our ultimate destiny? Do you know you can't get answers to any of this that are objective answers unless you go outside the system? What do I mean by outside the system? If we stay inside the world here, just materials, just us, even if we do have minds and not just materials, if it's just us, all it is our pooled speculations about what purpose is. If there is no God, there is no ultimate purpose. We all just become worm food anyway when we're done, right? When we die. There is no ultimate purpose. In order for a system to have purpose, it's got to come from outside the system. And in this case, it comes from God, who is the objective good. His nature is objectively good. So he gives us purpose. Our origin is from him. Our identity is in him. Our meaning is to know him and to make him known. How should we live then? That's what is pointed out quite a bit in the Bible. And what's our ultimate destiny? Actually, Daniel tells what our ultimate destiny is when we get to chapter 12, but we're not getting there just now. You can stay right in Daniel and get our ultimate destiny. But you've got to go outside the system to get objective meaning. We're just subjects. We're all subjective. Why is my opinion better than yours if there is no objective standard outside of us by which we can judge which is better? There has to be an objective standard out there for anything to be truly good or truly evil. If it's just our opinion, it's nothing. I mean, you can look at it this way. You make a board game, Monopoly, right? Who imposes the rules on the board game Monopoly? The guy who wrote it, right? The guy who created it. His rules are the rules that give the game meaning and purpose. If it's just us down here, and there is nobody who created this, then there is no ultimate purpose. Everything's a matter of opinion. So Daniel's saying we got to go outside the universe to get true meaning, and there is a God that gives that to us. So what happens next? He goes in to see the king. Arioch took Daniel to the king at once and said, I have found a man among the exiles from Judah who can tell the king what his dream means. Not just what his dream means. He could tell the king what the dream is too, right? But notice how he just said, I. Now, did he really go find this guy? No. Daniel came to him. Notice how he took credit, though. That's so typical, isn't it? I'll take credit. Oh, king, don't worry, I got it. I figured this whole thing out. Here he is. The king asked Daniel, also called Belteshazzar. Remember, that's his Babylonian name because they're trying to mold him into a good Babylonian. Are you able to tell me what I saw in my dream and interpret it? Daniel replied, no wise man, enchanter, magician, or diviner can explain to the king the mystery he has asked about. Why? Because they're all false prophets. They don't really have access outside. They just admitted it. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. Oh, now, he's not taking credit for himself, is he? He's saying there's a God in heaven that does this. Then he goes on to say, as you were lying there, O king, your mind turned to things to come. In other words, the future. And the revealer of mystery showed you what is going to happen. As for me, this mystery has been revealed to me, not because I have greater wisdom than other living men, but so that you, O king, may know the interpretation and that you may understand what went through your mind. So again, he's not taking any credit, is he? He's given all the credit to God. He's given all the glory to God. He's not saying, I did this, I came up with this isn't me, I'm just the messenger here. Now, he goes into the dream, the famous dream, which you've probably heard about even if you've never read the book. It says, you looked, O king, and there before you stood a large statue, an enormous, dazzling statue, awesome in appearance. The head of the statue was made of pure gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of baked clay. Feet of clay? Feet of clay. While you were watching, a rock was cut out, not by human hands. It struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and smashed them. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were broken into pieces at the same time and became like chaff on a threshing floor in the summer. The wind swept them away without leaving a trace, but the rock that struck the statue became a huge mountain and filled the whole earth. What's this rock and what's this correspondence to a mountain mean?
Kind of comparing to God?
Yeah, this is a kingdom. The mountain is supposed to be God's kingdom. So he goes through 4 different empires, and then he says, but there's going to be an empire not cut by human hands. Basically, it's coming from God that's going to fill the whole earth. Now, what does all this mean? Here's where commentators may disagree a little bit. Most of them don't disagree over the first 3 empires. There is some disagreement over the 4th, but let's just take a look at it. Here is a depiction of the statue that Nebuchadnezzar saw. The head of gold, who does that correspond to? Babylon. Yeah, Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar himself, actually. So he's going, hey, this is pretty good. You know, I'm the head of gold. And you'll notice as we go down here, the metals get less and less valuable, but they get stronger. So 605 to 539 BC, Nebuchadnezzar actually died in 562. Then there were some leaders that followed him. A couple were assassinated. And then ultimately in 539, it gave way to the Medo-Persian Empire. That's the chest of silver, or chest and arms of silver. And they went for about 200 years, 539 to about 332 BC or so. Who is bronze here? Yeah, that's Greece. And Greece, led by Alexander the Great, who died at about age 33, but by age 33, you'll see here in a minute, he conquered most of the known world at the time. And he died, by the way, in Babylon. Anyway, the belly and the thighs are of Greece, and most commentators say the legs, Rome. Yeah, Rome. The legs and the feet of iron and clay, and Rome essentially, you could argue about these dates, but 63 BC is, I think, where they really set up the Republic. And the Roman Empire, as we know it, the Western Roman Empire basically was defeated in 476, so it goes for about 500 years. The Eastern Roman Empire, not really the Roman Empire, the Eastern leg of it, Constantinople, went till 1453 when the Muslims took them over. Because, you know, there was a split between the East and the West. And so that lasted a lot longer. Now, what about this rock here? That's the everlasting kingdom, the stone cut not by human hands. So notice, we go from very valuable to less valuable. In fact, the text says that as Daniel's talking to Nebuchadnezzar, he says, then an inferior kingdom will arise after you. But imagine telling Nebuchadnezzar, yeah, your kingdom's going to be over someday. What? Yeah, going to be over someday. And there's going to be an inferior one. They get less and less valuable, but they get stronger in terms of their metals. Until you get down to the toes here, which are a mixture of iron and clay, feet of clay. The feet are iron and clay. And there's a lot of speculation as to what that means. It could mean 10 European nations. You've probably heard that. The European Union kind of thing is going to have some kind of play here in the end times, but it's speculation at this point. How big were these kingdoms? Well, Babylon, or Babylonia, went in this area here, pretty much down to the Persian Gulf and up into what we would call modern-day Turkey and over into Egypt. So remember, Nebuchadnezzar knocked out the Assyrians and then knocked out the Egyptians and then took over Babylon. So he had quite a kingdom. The silver, Medo-Persia, they came together and took out Babylon in 539 BC, and they went for about 200 years and covered all this area. Quite impressive, as you can see. Greece, under Alexander the Great, was pretty impressive. In fact, if you follow the exploits of Alexander the Great in about 10 or 12 years, he was relentless. He died, he was only 33 years old. He died in Babylon. But he went all the way over into India, just right near India, and covered all this area. And, of course, Rome covered just about the entire Western world here, and, of course, went further over into France and into England, so it covered all of Europe as well. And the overall everlasting kingdom, what's that going to cover? The everlasting kingdom is going to cover the whole earth. And when is that coming, by the way? Later. Soon.
We don't know.
Jesus as a man didn't know, which means nobody on TV knows either. So if you're watching a TV show right now and they're trying to tell you when Jesus is coming back, change the channel. They don't know. If Jesus didn't know as a man, what?
And warn your friends.
And warn your friends. Yeah, that's right. He could come back any minute. He doesn't have to wait for anything on the prophetic calendar. It's been imminent from the first time he ascended to heaven. He comes back when the fullness of the Gentiles comes in. When does that happen? We don't know. We're just supposed to occupy till he comes. We're supposed to be ready. And when he comes, and watching. That's right. So I'm not watching for the Antichrist. I'm watching for the Christ. Okay? Watch for the Christ, not the Antichrist. Okay, so in the time of those kings, now he's talking about the end times now. In the time of those kings, the 10 kings from the toes, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed, nor will it be left to another people. It will crush all those kingdoms and bring them to an end, but it will itself endure forever. This is the meaning of the vision of the rock cut out of the mountain, but not by human hands. In other words, it's supernatural. It's not a human kingdom. It's a divine kingdom. And why does it have to be a divine kingdom? Why can't we reach utopia just us, just people? Because we're fallen. Because cultures degrade themselves. because we're fallen human beings. We get real arrogant, real sinful, and we destroy ourselves, and we destroy others too. And that's what's happening to this country right now. It happened over and over again in Judah. You remember the cycle they went through, where they're doing fine in prosperity, then they get arrogant, then they start forgetting about God, they get real sinful, God judges them, they repent, they come back and get prosperity again, and they just keep going in the cycle. New news is just old news happening to new people, right? We're never going to make it on our own. There's never going to be a utopia on earth. You need God to come and set it up, and that's what he's going to do. He says, a rock that broke the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold to pieces. The great God has shown the king what will take place in the future. The dream is true, and the interpretation is trustworthy. All this, king, is true. It's going to happen. Now, how did Nebuchadnezzar react? He actually got on his face, but before we get to that, when you think of a stone, do you think anything from the Old or the New Testament? The cornerstone. Who is the stone? Yeah, the stone is Jesus. This is from 1 Peter 2, quoting Psalm 118. See, I lay a stone in Zion, a chosen and precious cornerstone, and the one who trusts in him will never be put to shame. You're never going to be put to shame if you trust in the cornerstone, and the cornerstone is Jesus. The stone the builders laid is the chief cornerstone, but many of them have tripped over it. You can read 1 Peter chapter 2 on this. You can also read Psalm 118 on this. And I think this is also in Isaiah somewhere. It may be Isaiah 28. I'd have to look that up. But it's also in Isaiah, this stone metaphor. Okay? So check 1 Peter 2:6 out on that first. So what does Nebuchadnezzar do? Nebuchadnezzar fell prostrate before Daniel and paid him honor and ordered that an offering and incense be presented to him. The king said to Daniel, surely your God is the God of gods and the Lord of kings and a revealer of mysteries, for you were able to reveal this mystery. Your God is the God of gods. Now, does this mean he's a believer at this point? Not necessarily. He's saying God of gods. He could be a polytheist at this point, right? All right, you got the big dude. Your dude is bigger than all these other dudes. So we don't know exactly what he believes at this point. We'll learn more when we get to chapter 4. But right now in chapter 2, at least he's coming along. And he's not going to wipe out. I don't know what he did with the astrologers. It doesn't say. He may have wiped them out anyway. Doesn't say, right? He could have killed them all anyway and said, hey, this guy is the real deal. Why do I need these bozos for? If these guys, if they can't understand, or if they don't have access to the author of the world, how can they help me determine the purpose of the world? They can't. Why do I have them around here? So then the king placed Daniel in a high position and lavished many gifts on him. He made him ruler over the entire province of Babylon and placed him in charge of all its wise men. And then what did Daniel say about that? Hey, whoa, king, how about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? I need them too. Okay, they can come too. So he got his friends some good deals too. Things never change, do they? Right? It's not what you know, it's who you know. So he's taking care of his friends right there. Now, what are some lessons we can take from Daniel chapter 2? Obviously, the first lesson is God is sovereign and he is involved in this world. We don't always see him involved in this world, but he is. Secondly, since God's past predictions have proven correct, we can trust him going forward. Because these predictions, by the way, are true. They happened. Babylon, or Babylonia, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome, all happened. Now some will try and say, well, Daniel was written late. It was written after Greece had already come to power and fallen. We're going to deal with that in a future session. The evidence points very strongly the other way, that Daniel was literally written in the 6th century BC, the 500s BC. And if that truly is the case, this is prophecy. This is not history. But we'll get to that later. Finally, man's wicked kingdoms come and go, but God's righteous reign is coming and will last forever. Are you ready? That's the question. Are you ready? He's coming. He's already proven that he can create the universe and then tell the future because he's outside of time. He's already told the future here. If his previous pronouncements about the future were true, do you think his other pronouncements about the future are going to be true? Get ready.